Like many children, we have all heard our parents saying the words, study harder, work harder. However, the difference in my family was that the following words were added because of what you look like. Study harder, work harder because of what you look like. This was the mantra that my parents bought into and instilled in both my sister and myself throughout our childhood. It was a protective shield placed around us, rooted in love. It was also rooted in their own experiences of pain and hurt as immigrants, and it was rooted in their realization of never truly being accepted as Canadian.
Many weeks later, my parents realized that she was being taught the grade 3 curriculum and not her grade 4. My sister and I recall our parents trying to figure out why, and my dad inquired about it with the classroom teacher. The response that she was in grade 3. No meetings were offered with my parents, and they did not ask any further questions. It was that model minority myth of being quiet, silent, and uncomplaining that transpired in this family situation. My parents, as new immigrants, didn't know that they had the voice to express their concern, and there was no one to support them in navigating through the system.
I constantly adjusted myself and moved in ways to blend in just enough that my difference would not be detected or visible, and others would see me as if I was one of them.
This is when I realized that what I experienced way back in the 80s continued to be the experience for so many of our students. The model minority profile that so many of our students continue to need to live up to for themselves, for their families, for some of their teachers.
I still remember how uncomfortable it was for me when an influx of newcomer students from Hong Kong started attending my high school. As I observed my teachers and peers make sense of these newcomer students, I often witnessed them praising their learners for just how good at math that they were, how respectful, compliant, eager to please. They were basically praised for being model immigrants. But at the other hand, these students were also seen as a threat by my teachers and peers, that they could afford with their foreign money, nicer cars than what the teachers had, that they were gaining all the attention and favor of educators because they were so easy to teach, and that they were unfairly driving up academic standards and taking all the university spots from Canadian students. These students were also a threat to me because I felt as though their presence disrupted all I had worked so hard for to assimilate. I didn't want to be mistaken for this other. My internalized racism caused me to police these students for what I saw as their foreignness. So because I did all that I could to distance myself from them, I remember I was actually quite proud that my math marks were low, because that to me was a marker that I was different from them.
We know that the model minority myth is a social construct that is widely believed, that impacts not only the way that Asian students and families are seen, but how Asian families and students see themselves. I often find myself in conversations with well-meaning educators that have bought into this model minority myth.
I'd enter a new school, and the staff are usually friendly and helpful, such as telling me directions to classrooms or the staff room. And then they'd also reassure me and say something like, "Oh, you're not gonna have to worry, there's not gonna be any classroom management issues because they're Asian." Initially, I'd thank them for the heads up, but I'm thinking, okay, so are you saying that because they're Asian, they're gonna be easy to manage?
And we'll say things like, these families, they only care about marks, or they put so much pressure on their children to excel that they don't care about the mental health. Or they always ask for homework and they don't value sports or perhaps social connections. And these generalizations are just not true. And they paint the entire Asian community as monolithic. And that is an inaccurate and it's a dangerous practice.
If you don't conform because of your ability, if you don't conform because of your gender or sexuality, where is there space for you? And there isn't. You're an outsider. You don't belong. And not only do you not belong in the mainstream, you end up not belonging in your own home. You don't belong in your own cultural group. You don't belong in your own religious community. This myth is so pervasive. It really impacts all realms of young people's lives. And this has a tremendous negative impact on the mental health of our young people. This is something that I still hear very regularly. People's judgment of how they perceive me to be an Asian, how Asian am I, directly connected with how I fulfill that myth or not.
While these things might seem kind of trivial, to a lot of degree, the internal expectation that I think a lot of students also feel right now is that they don't fit in that box.
In my own life, I never prescribed to the notion of the model minority. I couldn't sit down and concentrate on my kumon. I hated playing the violin. I always wanted to play sports, and I was always loud, joking around, and never afraid to speak my mind. And even in my own comment here, I think there is a continual need to understand and deconstruct the negative stereotypes associated with the idea of the model minority.
I've also, encountered students who were really eager to participate in student life and leadership and would aim for the roles of secretary or treasurer, but could never envision themselves as the president or vice president of a group or student body.
So how do we respect our students' families and their lived experiences while challenging the model minority myth?
When we start to understand how anti-Asian racism, but also racism in general, is all really linked to systemic oppression, not just for the Asian community, but for so many communities, for people of color, and especially for our Indigenous, Black, and Latin communities.
I will stress the importance of social justice activism now, not when they experience their own social injustice, but now, as their work in supporting other racialized groups is all a part of shattering socially constructed myths like the idea of the model minority.
This is a cycle that we must interrupt and aim to seize. We need to allow our children to be who they are. We need to celebrate each of our students for their individuality and not for how well they fit into the profile of the model minority, in which we as educators sometimes unconsciously expect them to be.